Last week, Belgium celebrated its National Day. But for Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever, it was not much of a celebration. When asked by journalists, Prime Minister De Wever refused to say Vive la Belgique, or Long Live Belgium. This was not an accidental faux pas, because as a Flemish nationalist, De Wever doesn't really think Belgium should exist. In fact, just a couple of years ago, De Wever said he would die happier as a southern Dutchman than as a Belgian, and earlier this year said that the separation of what is now Belgium from the Netherlands was, quote, the greatest disaster that has ever befallen us. So in this video, we're going to explore the Flemish separatist movement, explain how De Wever reluctantly became Prime Minister, and whether or not he could actually split the country up. If you're interested in the political alliances and groupings which shape our world, then you might enjoy our poster, Every Alliance Explained. It shows, in slightly confusing detail, all of the world's major alliances and how different countries link together. Check out the poster by clicking the link in the description. For those of you who don't already know, Belgium is made up of 3 regions. Flanders in the north, which is predominantly Dutch-speaking, Wallonia, primarily French-speaking, in the south, and Brussels, the capital, which is bilingual. Bart De Wever, meanwhile, is certainly an interesting character. He has, for example, been voted Politician of the Year and Dick of the Year several times each, even managing to win both awards in the same year. But more importantly, over the past 2 decades, he's taken his new Flemish Alliance Party, or N-VA, from essentially political irrelevance to being the largest political force in the country, with it consistently being the largest party in both the Flemish and federal parliaments for more than a decade, and De Wever ultimately became Prime Minister earlier this year. His policy proposals, particularly on Flemish separatism, have shifted and largely moderated over the years. But he is ultimately still a believer in independence for Flanders, and, based on some of his comments, is apparently emotionally attached to the idea of Dutch reunification, even if it's not a part of his political platform, which we'll come back to later. Flemish separatists, ranging from autonomists to outright secessionists, usually make their case by pointing to socio-economic, political and cultural divides between Flanders and Wallonia, with their main complaints being that the current setup is a recipe for infamous political gridlock, and that, as the wealthier, more populous region, Flanders is a net contributor to the federal budget, while Wallonia, the less wealthy region with higher unemployment, is a net recipient. In fact, De Wever once controversially likened interregional transfers to Wallonia to drugs for a junkie. For context, Belgium emerged as an independent kingdom through the 1830 Belgian Revolution against Dutch Protestant rule. But the Flemish movement first emerged largely as a cultural movement, seeking equal linguistic rights for the Dutch-speaking majority, as newly independent Belgium was dominated by a French-speaking Walloon ruling class. In the decades after World War II, Flemish nationalism strengthened as a political force, driven by a shift in Belgium's economic centre of gravity. Wallonia, previously the wealthier region, suffered sharp industrial decline, while Flanders, once an agricultural backwater, enjoyed an economic boom, spurred by growth in light industry, services, commerce and trade. Throughout the 1960s, the People's Union made gains at successive elections. This was a big-tent Flemish nationalist party that included Flemings from federalists to secessionists. Its growth contributed to a series of major state reforms that, from 1970 to 1993, turned Belgium into a pretty uniquely complex federal state, divided along regional and linguistic/cultural lines. In short, Belgium is divided into 3 regions, dealing with so-called hard matters like the economy, infrastructure and employment, and 3 language-based communities, dealing with soft matters like education, health and welfare, leaving the country with a total of 6 parliaments and 6 governments. The move towards federalism did not satisfy the secessionists and further right factions of the Flemish movement, which formed Flemish Bloc, a far-right anti-immigration secessionist party that grew considerably through the 1990s and early 2000s, eclipsing the declining People's Union and becoming one of the most popular parties in Flanders by 2004, before it was dissolved after being convicted of discrimination. These days, the Flemish nationalist movement is represented by two main parties, the New Flemish Alliance, or NVA, and Flemish Interest. As we've mentioned, the NVA is the party of Prime Minister De Wever, and during his 2-decade leadership, he's transformed it from a single-issue party into a distinctly conservative party with broader appeal. De Wever softened the party's position on independence, and while that does remain its ultimate dream, it sees this as a longer-term gradual project, for now officially advocating for what it calls confederalism, a setup that would see the regions basically take on all powers and responsibilities except only those few that are voluntarily ceded to a jointly run confederal level. Flemish Interest, meanwhile, considered a far-right party, is more forcefully pro-independence, stating that it wants to bring about the orderly division of Belgium, a negotiated process that would be kick-started by a declaration of sovereignty. It's the successor of the dissolved Flemish bloc, but did not see its own support surge until the latter half of the 2010s, when, like many other anti-establishment European parties, it made significant gains, thanks to its staunchly anti-immigration nationalistic stance, though a cordon sanitaire has kept it out of government at the Flemish and federal level. Right up until the 2024 election, Flemish Interest had looked set to win both the Flemish and federal parliamentary elections, in what would have been a double first. However, De Wever's NVA managed to defy the polls and place first in both elections. A federal coalition led by De Wever's NVA was one of few viable options due to parliamentary arithmetic, and after more than 200 days of negotiations, an agreement was reached that made De Wever, begrudgingly, Belgium's first Flemish nationalist prime minister in early February. But don't be fooled into thinking that this means that Flemish independence, or even confederalism, is on the horizon anytime soon. Firstly, the reality of coalition politics means that Bart De Wever is not really in the position to pursue it. And, in fact, the only institutional reform set out in the coalition agreement is to abolish the Senate. And while it says De Wever will draw up proposals for further state reform, these are by no means guaranteed to come to fruition. In the meantime, the main priorities for reform appear to be socio-economic ones, with major changes set out for tax, pensions, and the labour market. And secondly, there isn't actually majority support for independence, despite the recent success of separatist parties in Flanders. At the 2024 Flemish election, the NVA and Flemish Interest won a combined 47% of the vote. But remember that officially the NVA advocates for confederalism, not secession, and a pre-election poll found that Flemish voters put migration and the economy at the top of their list of the most important issues, while just 4% said it was the structure of the state. Nevertheless, it remains to be seen whether De Wever learns to love what is already quite an unforgiving job. But for now, the slightly surreal reality of a Flemish separatist Belgian Prime Minister continues, and barring snap elections, he may well be the one who has to plan and oversee the 200th anniversary of Belgian independence in 2030. If you want to know more about this topic, then there's plenty of other outlets reporting on it too. Unfortunately though, every news source has a bias, and no matter how hard each of us try, we'll inevitably miss a story or two, or worse, only hear half the story in the first place. That's where our sponsor this week, Ground News, comes in. Ground News is a website and app that collects thousands of articles to help you better understand the world around you, pulling back the curtain on media bias. For example, this story about the Belgian government tightening border controls has been covered by more than 45 sources. We know that more than 5 of these have been reported by the left, and 9 of these have been reported by the right. Every story also comes with a detailed view of the bias distribution, factuality scores, and even specific ownership information. But my favourite part of the app and website is the aptly named blind spot feed. It presents you with stories and articles that haven't been reported on by one side of the aisle or the other. For instance, if you lean right, you might have missed this story about the Netherlands banning far-right Israeli ministers from the country over Gaza. When it comes to blind spots, it's not just about discovering different stories. It's also about discovering just how political bias frames the stories themselves. Having a tool that helps you spot this and helps you take action really is a game changer. It's no secret that here at TLDR News, we're constantly thankful for Ground News. It's such an incredibly useful platform that captures information you can't get anywhere else, and keeps you informed in a media landscape that's constantly trying to attract your attention and sway you towards or away from certain political viewpoints. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan using the link in the description, or by scanning the QR code. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.